Hi, thanks for tuning in to episode 17 of our Tuesday night podcast. Hi, I'm Todd Sachs. I'm your host, and I'm a real estate broker here in Maryland, where we help buyers and sellers of both residential and commercial real estate. And if you're anywhere else in the country, we can help you through our amazing referral broker network. And so if you don't have an agent, you're looking for real estate, either buying or selling, you can drop me a line anytime. I'll be glad to make sure you're well taken care of. And tonight we're talking about commercial real estate and the future of our buildings and the new must-haves for shopping, dining, and the workplace. And guys, I know we're in the middle of a pandemic right now, but this too will pass. And we're going to talk about some exciting things tonight. And sort of, we don't even realize how, these commercial buildings shape our world and really enhance our lives. And tonight I'm with architect Adrienne Nelson, and she is a associate with Pickard Chilton. They're located in New Haven, Connecticut, and she's going to deliver to you tonight. So without further ado, Adrienne, thanks for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be a part of the podcast and to be able to share a little bit about the future of architecture and building design. So as you mentioned, I work for Pickard Chilton Architects out of New Haven, Connecticut. We're design architects that focus primarily on high-rise commercial architecture. We also do master planning, headquarters projects, and residential as well. And we practice all over the world. Currently, we have projects in Japan, Seattle, Germany, Texas. So we practice globally. And as I mentioned, we're a design architect. So primarily the way that we work is we focus on as design aesthetic consultants, and we partner with an architect of record who works with us through the technical parts of architecture. But as you mentioned, we're at a really big influx, a changing point in architecture where many things that we've been studied and been dreaming about are coming to fruition. And part of the reason is the change making that's happening as a result of this pandemic. So I'm looking forward to sharing some of those thoughts with you.
And I guess a lot of it actually has just been escalated because of the pandemic. I mean, a lot of these, changes that have been happening, this working remotely is certainly not a new concept. I mean, it's been happening probably over the last 5 or so years. It's just kind of pushed it along. So you have your bachelor's in fine arts and interior design, and you have your master's of architecture.
Yes, yeah. I started out in interior design. I loved it. I took a studio my last year in college, which was a high-rise architecture studio in tandem with the Masters of Architecture students. Partnered with a wonderful woman who had an interest in interior design and was a really talented architect. And she let me start to try and practice a little bit in architectural design. She and I designed a 40-story tower in downtown Chicago as part of our thesis project. And I realized that I was meant to be an architect. I fell in love with it, and that's the story. So headed right into graduate school and got my
and Pickard Chilton, you're on the leadership team there, and you guys are a pretty decent sized company. I mean, I think, how many people do you have?
Yeah, we're 50 architects. So we are a medium to larger size firm. Everybody in the practice are architects. Some share different backgrounds as I do. In interior design, we have some folks who have backgrounds in computer programming, landscape architecture. We actually have someone on staff who is also a trained librarian. So and we have urban planners. So we have a wide mix of folks within the practice.
And you're also taking an active role in teaching our young people. So can you tell us a little bit? I know you're a board member. It's the New Haven chapter of the ACE Mentor program, and you work with high school students. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, actually. So our firm has hosted an ACE Mentor team for the past 11 years, if I've got the dates right. And so ACE Mentor is a national program, and it's really prevalent in the building industry. So most companies, if you reach out to them, they're aware of it, if not have people involved in it. But it's a great opportunity to bring young people into the architecture, construction, engineering fields and to teach them a little bit about the building industry and what we do. I think many people are aware that folks in the trades and within architecture, construction, and engineering are retiring at a high rate. We lost a number of professionals in the last recession. And as we move ahead and the building industry increases with the amount of built projects, we need more and more people to join architecture, construction, and engineering. So part of the mission is to be able to introduce the field to young people and to help provide mentorship to high school students. So we have about 20 kids who, if we were not in a pandemic situation, would come into our studio on every other Thursday night. They get their own architecture project, and we work with them from about October until April. And then at the end of the year, they present that to their friends and family in a final project. So it's a really rewarding experience. This year, it's a little bit different. Everything's remote, but it's been very successful. And fortunately, we've been able to have more students join because it's not limited to the city centers. We can have people join online. So students who are in more remote locations who weren't able to join previously are now able to join the team. So
at what year are they eligible for this? I mean, is it just for seniors?
It's 9 through 12. So we have freshmen, sophomore, junior, seniors. And it's a great opportunity, too, because they're coming from all different schools. And so it's a chance for them to get to meet students at different ages from different backgrounds. And we have mentors from throughout the various disciplines who come and provide mentorship, so they get a lot of exposure to different people in the industry.
Well, good for you. I mean, that's really nice, that you can, share your experience and inspire our young adults as they're, trying to figure out what the heck they want to do. I mean, it's so much pressure on these kids nowadays. They have to try and figure out what they want to do at such a young age, and many of them, I mean, they go to school and they change their majors, and so it's great. I'm sure that you're really inspiring them. So thanks for doing that. So let's talk about COVID. It was about a year ago. I was at the ICSC conference in New York City, which is the International Council of Shopping Center Owners, and because we do a little bit of commercial real estate here, and no one was talking about this pandemic then, and then all of a sudden, whammo, here we start hearing about the coronavirus, and then it changes to COVID-19, and we're in lockdown here in March. So how are you guys handling that? Can you just talk about what was it like for you in March as being a leader at the firm? How's that different from how you're operating now?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think like so many people, we were operating as business as normal at the beginning of March. I was actually in San Francisco for project meetings the first week of March and getting ready to return. I think it was supposed to fly out the 15th or something. And we were watching the news and watching kind of various schools decide to close. And we were starting to look at some of the information. And we are very, very fortunate that as architects, we are privileged to be able to work from home, as many people are not as privileged to do that as we are. And because we're a global office and we practice all over the country and we travel to projects, we were very accustomed to being able to work from home. So we have a couple of really fantastic IT professionals on staff who were able to really quickly mobilize all the resources that we had in the office. And we had been kind of talking about it for about a week. I think we met on Monday before we closed down, and it was kind of rumblings like, well, maybe we'll think about this in a couple of weeks. And then Friday morning, we were ready to close the doors, send everybody home, make sure that we were safe. So within about a week, we closed the office doors. Everybody started working remotely, and luckily, we were able to be extremely productive. So it's changed the way in which we practice slightly, because as architects, being able to stand around a model or a roll of trace and to be able to sketch out ideas is invaluable. But we've been nimble and been able to harness a lot of the new digital tools that have been coming out. Everybody's on Zoom from 9 to 5 these days. And so we are as well, because collaboration is a large part of our process. so, we've been able to manage it pretty successfully. I'd say the biggest challenge is managing client relationships, and some decisions that could be made pretty quickly over a phone model and a face-to-face discussion sometimes take a little bit more work, because you have to talk around a static photo or turn around a digital model and try and bring people along with the decision-making process. So it's a new challenge in the way in which we work, and all architects work, in trying to work through our communication and design communication to help problem solve and create the best solutions for our clients remotely.
Yeah. So as a leader, I mean, were you freaking out? I mean, was there any point where you were saying, how's this going to affect us financially? Are we going to be able to continue? I mean, you're a pretty decent sized firm with a lot of salaries, and, and you need projects. So was that a scary time shutting down?
Absolutely. I think for anybody, we didn't know what to expect or where we were headed. And because of the work that we do as design architects, we're very used to a fast-paced, unpredictable schedule. Things change as clients change their minds in headquarters projects, or with cities when you have an unpredictable municipality board. And so we're fairly accustomed to kind of rolling with the punches and being nimble and being flexible. That being said, we were committed to the clients that we currently have, and we were very fortunate to have some projects that were that the client decided to continue on with the design process early on. We did have a few projects that people decided to take a breath and pause on, and we've been very fortunate that the developers that we're working with have determined that they want to continue on with the design process in those situations. And I would say that one of the main reasons why they went on pause was so many people didn't know what was going to happen with the city process. Prior to COVID, we're dependent upon having in-person meetings with city planners or hearing boards. And once everything went remote, everybody was wondering how local governments were going to be able to handle that change. And some have not been as successful as others, but we've been very pleasantly surprised to see that the process has continued on, and in some situations has been more efficient because we don't have to wait for a public hearing in a building that has to be scheduled 2 months out. We can schedule a Zoom meeting that's publicly accessible, and we can get through the city process efficiently.
And I do a little bit of developing here in Maryland, and the kind of cool thing is, who's going to show up at these meetings, because they have to register. At least here they have to register at least, I think, 24 hours ahead of time, so you can actually find out if you're going to have any opposition, or any of the neighbors that are going to that are registered to be on the Zoom hearing. Also, you touched on, a lot of people may not realize. Yeah, the municipality shut down. Everybody was working from home. So I actually have friends that are, pushing dirt around, and they have big machines and things like that. And they were in the middle of projects, and the project managers put padlocks on the gates and locked in their equipment. I know, one contractor had all of his equipment tied up. He couldn't even get a hold of anybody to get his earth movers out of the job. Because it was a government job, and it was just completely shut down. And then, when you're trying to get permits processed, and a simple change or amendment to a permit. We had inspectors that were basically coming out, inspecting anyway, and taking pictures and documenting to later put those things in the computer system. And you're wondering, geez, hopefully they're going to do it, because you're backfilling and you're trying to keep things moving. So, are you willing to share, what percentage of your clients put things on pause?
Mm-hmm. I would say, this is not a scientific, because I have not gone back and reviewed the list, but I'd say we probably had about 15% that said, hold on, let's take a 4-week, 6-week pause. Let's see where we shake out. And that was kind of right away in the spring. So folks got through March. We realized that, many folks in parts of the country, especially on the West Coast, were completely on lockdown. And so it really wasn't until summer, until people decided, okay, this will end. We'll keep moving. We have access to the local governments and the officials that we need to get access to sites. As you mentioned, a lot of those projects were projects where, we couldn't get surveyors out onto sites, or we couldn't get, any soil borings or anything like that because the cities were shut down. So once that started to loosen up in the summertime, we saw a little bit of a surprising resurgence of the projects and more confidence from our clients about commercial development.
Was there any of that 15% that financing was an issue, where the lenders or the banks that were funding the projects stopped lending, or the money kind of dried up?
Not to my knowledge. I haven't heard any concerns from any of my clients specifically about financial concerns. It's really just been the logistics of access to the sites themselves. And that isn't to say that financially that it hasn't been a concern. It's just not been something that I've been hearing.
So do you have any concerns?
I do have a concern that this will end quickly, I think. We just got the news, what was it, yesterday evening, that a vaccine has been approved. And so we're starting to move in a forward direction in terms of getting some relief so that, the hospitals are going to be able to have beds, hopefully, in the future, which means that governments will be more open to reducing restrictions and movement. So I think that my biggest concern is that the recovery from this process may be more long-term than what we're currently seeing. So, the building industry oftentimes has a little bit of a delayed response. And so although our specific sector may not be facing a lot of projects that have been shelved or gone on pause, there are a lot of other disciplines that have been facing that. And there have been a lot of challenges in other architecture firms. I have many peers who have been furloughed or have been laid off, or they're have taken significant salary reductions. And what that says to me is that there are a fair amount of projects that did stop. And so I think in the next couple of years, we'll see that effect start to kind of push into the construction industry. And so I hope that we can get out of this quickly, and so that delayed response isn't very long.
What do you see as far as, you hear a lot in the news about them being, winners and losers in this, out of all of this. And if you're working for Amazon, obviously, times have never been better, right? The amount of, jobs just in delivery drivers and, the technology side, the things that they're working on, they're really creating. They're a huge employer right now, and this kind of fueled them. A couple of years ago, I was at a conference with BOMA, which is Building Owners and Managers Association. I was at their annual conference in Nashville, and they were talking about, and this was way before we were thinking about pandemics. They were, WeWork, that big, shared environment space, open floor plans where, like the Starbucks, right, where you just take your laptop and sit there with people you don't know, and just you're comfortable with just being there working. And they were predicting that a large percentage of our workforce would be independent contractors. You have so many people graduating colleges and a lot of debt, and a lot of them are having difficulty finding those careers and where they're making money. And you're seeing a lot of people businesses are downsizing. So the natural progression is these people start their own businesses or subcontracting and moonlighting, whatever you want to call it. But the office environment was sort of like poised to change, and maybe not in the big scale of some of the projects that you're working on. But what about the office industry in general? Do you think we're ever going back to that same way that we used to, work?
Yeah, I think the nature of work, as you pointed out, it was already poised to change, and we were already moving in that direction. And it really changed. A big turning point was the recession in 2008, 2009, as people were giving up their leases and businesses were downsizing and people were starting new businesses as independent contractors. That's where WeWork started to really get popular, hit its stride, and it just hit it out of the park. And now we have a situation where obviously we are either quarantined to our homes, or we're uncomfortable being around other people. It's not safe necessarily to be around other people. And so, how businesses that are solely based on being around strangers, I'm not sure how those folks have weathered or are going to weather the rest of this year financially. Once we do come out of this, I do think that there will be a return to the office environment. There are various studies and projections that say there is a more accepting culture now to be able to work from home, and on average, people who are millennials or Generation X will want to work anywhere from 2 to 2.5 days from home, so that they can have some more flexibility with work-life balance, or get some of their life back and avoid a commute. But people do want to be together. Most people in the studies that we've looked at are really missing that in face-to-face interaction and the connection with their colleagues, and they're feeling very isolated. And so I think that there will be a drive, to have employees will want to come back to work, if anything, for that human interaction.
So what will be the new responsible office? So what are you planning, and what are you guys working on to advise your client in that office, space? What are some of the things that you're working on with that?
Right. So for new projects, new construction, there are a number of things, as we mentioned at the beginning of the call, that we're already starting to be in process, but we're very conceptual and maybe nice to haves. And now those are going to become must-haves as we move into this new working environment. Things like touchless entries, being able to use destination dispatch with your cell phone, so that you don't have to touch any buttons. The elevator takes you to where you need to go. Being able to have restrooms that have more touchless fixtures, or potentially having more things like powder rooms and individual toilet rooms with a sink. Are great from a health standpoint, and being able to protect your occupants, but it's also an equity issue, which has been a conversation for a long time. And now we're seeing plumbing codes, not necessarily as a result of COVID, but a lot of the progress that's been made in equitable building design to be able to provide all gender restrooms. And now the code is going to be able to respond to that, to say, you don't have to specifically have a men's and women's room. You can provide all gender toilet rooms, and that will fulfill your toilet room counts. So I think there are a number of base building changes in new construction that are going to be required. I think also what we're going to see is a lot more access to the outdoors and natural ventilation. So from a sustainability standpoint, we're always trying to provide daylight and access to natural air. As architects, we sometimes get into arguments with the engineers because it's not the most efficient thing to do, to provide an operable window when you're trying to optimize your mechanical system. But there are changes in mechanical systems to enable nighttime flushing, to be able to completely swap out the air in the evening and make sure that we have fresh air during the day, or to have smart systems so that you can have zones where people can open the windows. If we want to have large conference rooms so that people can social distance, can we zone those mechanical rooms zone those rooms so that we can open the windows? So I think that access to natural ventilation, access to the outdoors, touchless fixtures and features, those are all going to be of a high priority as we move forward in the new office environment.
Yeah, so you had mentioned conference rooms. I mean, that's companies spend a lot of money on conference rooms, right? It takes up a lot of square footage. Square footage is money. So you do see people still sitting in conference rooms. You're designing them bigger, like you said, that where there is more social distancing. Do you think, that will stick? I mean, people have been going to work sick for years, right? I mean, so I think our tolerances now for people sitting across from you sniffling or sneezing or complaining that they have a sore throat I think that's going to change, where we're not going to have a tolerance for that. We're going to say, like, you're sick, you shouldn't be here. But we know people have to work. So before this pandemic, people went to work sick before. Do you see where even when there is this vaccine and people are comfortable entering the workspace, do you think some of these things are going to stick? So do you think that the distancing that where we're sitting will stay 6 foot or more?
Yeah, I do think that that's going to stay with us for a while, because I think whether it's, everybody can argue or can make the argument that it's very necessary from a health standpoint, but also from a psychological comfort standpoint. We've been in this situation and we've seen the effects of it. And so just in terms of making your employees comfortable, that's going to be necessary for some years to come. And I think as a society, we'll start to move towards the models that Asia and the European countries have been embracing for a while, where if you're not feeling well, you wear a mask, or if you're uncomfortable, you wear a mask, and that has become unfortunately kind of a political issue. But I think that societally will change a little bit going forward, because obviously with a vaccine, it's not going to just end immediately. There's going to be fits and starts of outbreaks. And as we start to get together, trying to establish a level of comfort is going to be a challenge. So I think being able to lay out desks so that you have space, prior to the pandemic, the goal was to pack as many people in as possible. We were seeing densities just, getting tighter and tighter and tighter. And I think that is changing, obviously, for necessary reasons. And I think it's also changing so that in a new building typology, it's not necessarily always possible to be able to create such a dense floor plate if we're going to be creating narrower buildings so that people have access to that natural light or ventilation, or providing, more conference rooms spread throughout the floor plate. So planning and interior planning is going to change a great deal. But in terms of the large conference rooms and people sitting next to one another, I don't know when we'll go back to a conference type situation. I certainly can't envision signing up for a conference where I'm sitting next to a stranger anytime soon. But I think those large conference rooms will be essential for having gatherings where we're bringing people back together, at the very least in the very beginning. And I think companies are already doing that. I know of some medical supply companies in our area that are utilizing their large conference rooms as the only workspaces. So they'll allow a couple of in-person meetings, but they must be in those large gathering spaces so that people can spread out.
How about kitchens, cafeterias? I mean, a lot of larger companies, they're feeding their employees and providing that. Some have the bar experience. So like after 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock, they all head to the bar that's in the office. What are your thoughts on that type of amenity for employees? Is that gone?
That's a great question. And I think that part of that has to do with the urban design in many places. As companies are getting larger and larger, for a long time, there's been this trend, especially in the tech industry, to provide a lot of food amenities, because we know that people gather wherever there's food. It's like when you have a party at your house, everybody hangs out in the kitchen, even though you just redecorated your living room. It's the same thing in an office environment. And so we've been seeing people putting coffee bars in, putting, bars for cocktails in the afternoon. That's been a real trend. But one of the ramifications of that is that some of the smaller retailers who are outside of those companies are saying, hey, wait, I don't want to put my bar at the bottom of your building because none of your employees are going to come down here and get their lunch. They've got free lunch in the tower. Why would I do that? And so I think you're seeing a lot more companies and developers start to really think about that in terms of how it impacts the cities that they are building in and putting their employees in. Because one of the main draws for getting and retaining talent is bringing to them to an exciting environment. And so if you have a building that's in the middle of a dead area where there's nothing going on, that's not really a draw. So I think it's an interesting question in terms of where we're headed. I think that we'll see more relationships between tenants and building owners and the retail at the ground level. And I hope that's the case so that we can try and revitalize and save some of our downtown areas. But I do think that's becoming more and more important to some of these bigger companies that are relocated to downtown areas.
That's very interesting. So the impact of these large corporations adding these employee amenities, the coffee bars and the free food and the cocktails in those mixed use where you have, like you're saying, the coffee shop or the restaurant that's within the same building, it's actually affecting the landlord because they're getting that pushback from the business that's they're there because of all of the employees. So when you start bringing those things in house, yeah, I didn't even think about that. That question was better than I expected it to be. So,
well, it's a real programming issue on both sides, right? For whomever the tenant is that you're trying to attract, and then also the urban environment you're trying to create and cultivate. And so, it's obviously a dialogue that folks have to have as we move forward. So.
Well, that's a great segue into restaurants and bars. So what do you think about, I mean, do you think in another 12 months, there won't be any of the, brands that we are familiar with now because there will be a new round of restaurant and bar owners? I mean, they're getting killed, right? I mean, they're being crushed by this. Do you represent any big restaurateurs?
We don't. We have certainly designed many retail spaces that have been open for various, food and beverage retailers to move into. We don't design specifically for those folks, but my heart goes out to all of the food and beverage industry and small business owners because it's I don't know how folks are doing it, and I really hope that there's some help for them in the future so that we can maintain, they're what make our cities so important and so special. And so, seeing people really struggle right now in the food and beverage industry is just, it's heartbreaking.
Well, you said it. We like to gather, we like to eat, and for many, they like to drink. So, when they are, sort of a big thread in the community, and especially our cities, just like you had mentioned. What type of conversations are you having with your clients right now? I mean, so obviously we're in another round of the pandemic. So, there is that vaccine that everyone's hopeful for. Our governor just said the cavalry was coming and now it's here, but give me some kind of idea of your client's confidence level right now.
Mm-hmm. I think that everybody is cautiously, I shouldn't say everyone, a lot of folks that we are working with are cautiously optimistic on new projects that are just starting out the gate. There are some projects that are farther along in the process, and I think that they're a little bit less confident. One of the nuances I should state, or kind of specifics I should state, is because we are design architects, we're heavily involved in the early phases of the project. So many of the projects that we're working on right now aren't going to be realized until the end of 2023, 2025. And so there is a little bit of time, a little bit of breathing room for the folks who are responsible for those projects to see how things are going to shake out. But it is a real challenge. We just talked about retail, trying to plan some of the ground floors, for instance, in various areas. Typically, in many of these projects, we would be heavily involved in some of the visioning for what we're seeing as trends and amenities that we want to be able to bring to cities. And so a lot of the conversations that we're having right now are, what are those amenities going to look like? What are people going to want to do? As you mentioned, are people going to want to go to bars? And is that a viable thing to plan for if we don't know if the current bars that are the hot places to go are going to be the places of the future? The couple of things that we are seeing more confidence in is that amenities for personal convenience will prevail as we move forward. The online ordering and convenience of everything that has just gone through the roof with the pandemic is going to continue. So how in our buildings do we provide convenient access to whether it be ride share or ride pickup, intermodal transportation? So are we providing bike infrastructure for bike parking so that people can avoid mass transit if that's what they choose to do. And then how are we providing those convenience amenities like food lockers, places where people can have their groceries delivered so they can avoid going to the grocery store after work if that's what they want to do. So those are a lot of the conversations that we're having because we think that the convenience that the pandemic has brought in terms of being able to order your Whole Foods order on your phone and have it arrive, an hour later, these types of things are going to continue. And we simply just don't know what's going to be created in the next year out of the design problems that we're facing because of the pandemic. We participated in an Uber competition for these flying VTOLs where you would, take your Uber to an intermodal facility, and then you'd be able to jump on a flying VTOL that would take you to another municipality. And it was, initially kind of a pie in the sky idea, but very, very quickly that became a reality. And they've already been doing testing in various locations in Asia. And so it's amazing how quickly some of these things that we thought were very, George Jetson have become a reality. So, a year ago, we talked about food lockers and, automated bike parking as a little bit more futuristic and less realistic and kind of conceptual. And now that those things are very much in the reality of what's happening. One of the more interesting things that I've read about recently is I think that nobody is looking to replace people in terms of the service industry, but how do we help to facilitate touchless transfer of goods and maintain jobs? And I think that is a really active conversation, not necessarily completely in the building industry, but in the service industry in particular.
I think the next round of automation is going to be really challenging. And this COVID has really accelerated that. Curbside pickup. I mean, I've been using it myself. I mean, going online, shopping, and will we ever go back to walking through the aisles and pick? I mean, it's like a pain in the butt, right? You can just pull up, you click I'm here, they bring it out, they load it in your car, the trunk, they shuts, and it's gone. So, now you see where you couldn't find any employees, a year ago, you walk into a big box store and try and find help to ask them. Now I can see where these big box stores will be full of employees that would be literally pulling, groceries or product to get it ready. So there is a huge shift. What will those jobs pay? And, so how will minimum wage really be important? So that we're able to, through the next round of automation, still find a job that will actually, allow you to live, right? Or have a roof over your head. I think a jobs crisis, at least until we figure this out, I'm really concerned about that, from a personal, and a business standpoint. What about the big cities? You hear on the news about, people fleeing from the big cities. I know people that are in New York City that can't wait for their leases to be up because their jobs have said you can work indefinitely from home or remotely. Do you see, this exodus in our larger, what were more popular cities, continuing and going more to rural areas and those developments, seeing those areas starting to develop? Or do you think we're going to move back into those cities?
I think that, history has shown that we'll move back to the cities. I think right now, absolutely, we're seeing an exodus from the cities. In New Haven, we're 90 minutes by train to New York City, and the real estate in New Haven has been out of this world. House across the street went up for market and was sold that night. I think that in the near term, certainly cities can continue to face a challenge in terms of people leaving. I think in the long term, we do need our cities, and they do function as a core part of our society. And so I think as things start to become safer, we make certain changes to make the environment safer. We retrofit buildings to be able to accommodate. It won't be too dissimilar from what we did at the turn of the century to be able to handle some of the pandemics then. Prior to the turn of the century, you weren't required to have a window in a bedroom. There were plumbing changes that happened. There was a lot more outdoor plumbing. Granted, the world is a completely different place, and it's hard to envision all the changes that could take place. But we're certainly seeing so much information coming out about how to adjust systems to be able to maintain the right level of humidity, to decrease the amount of virus spread. We are seeing a societal response in terms of people being responsible, or hopefully being responsible for themselves if they're feeling ill. And so as that trend continues, I think that we'll see a return to the city. It might look a little bit different, but I think that we will.
Yeah, and this retrofit that you're talking about, I mean, on a commercial building, a lot of people may not realize, but a commercial building stands for 80, 100 years. I mean, some of these buildings are quite old, and especially when you look at, like New York City, for example, I mean, a lot of old buildings. So repurposing. So if we see some of these buildings so let's take this older building that's been an office building forever. And, how do you see these buildings do you see them being torn down, or do you see them actually going through some type of, renovation to have what's needed, or the new standards of what people are? Because I mean, that's really what it is. If you're asking your employees to come back to work, you have to show them that you've been responsible, as a business or a building owner, to make it safe. I think that's going to be a big part of getting them to come back in. I mean, we're creatures of habit. And, they say a habit forms in 3 weeks, right? Or about 64, 68 revolutions of doing something, it's sort of trending new habits. Well, we're coming up on a year with this thing, so how long will it take to, like you said, get comfortable and gradually get back to business as usual? So what are these owners going to be facing? They have these old buildings, they're wanting tenants to stay or come back in. I mean, that could be a big thing too. The tenants going, we're out of here. We're not renewing our lease because we're going to go to the newer building or the more responsible building. So what can you tell these building owners about, is it better to tear the building down and build something new, or is it better just to retrofit what you have?
Yeah, and that it's a tough question to answer, but I think the simple question is, depending on the asset that you have, time and time again, people love the expression of old buildings. And, some of those adaptive reuse projects are, the most coveted. When we ask people, well, what do you want in your new headquarters building? They come with this beautiful brick, repurposed loft, workspace, tech space that they love. And so, if it's a beautiful building, chances are people are going to figure out a way to repurpose them. And, if it's a building that's not very efficient, by all means, it might mean that, another solution or another newer piece of architecture might be the solution. I think for people who are wondering how they're going to be repurposing, their existing infrastructure, there are some simple things that can be done. And in terms of simple programming, if there's a concern that you're going to have a small lobby that's going to catch a bunch of people at the same time, and people are going to be worried about coming to work, maybe you work with your tenants on programming when people come into the building. And there's a separate exit through an exit stair for those who are able to take that. There are things that could be done in terms of adjusting the infrastructure of toilet rooms. If there are not touchless fixtures, maybe that's an upgrade that can be made. And then in terms of the HVAC systems, if one has the resources to be able to update their infrastructure for HVAC, that's a huge cost, but also a huge solution that can be made. Some of the statistics about what can happen with more air exchanges with a stagnant air situation. I've read information that droplets with the virus can stay airborne for upwards of 5 minutes and longer. with a more active system and better air filtration, those droplets, the time that those remain airborne decreases by half. And it continues to decrease with the amount of volume that's exchanged, and then the efficiency of the filter to be able to clean the air. So there are a number of different things that people can do to maintain their existing assets. And I do think that there is a place for the existing infrastructure that we do have in our cities.
By the way, we're going to post all of Adrienne's contact information in the show notes, no matter where you're hearing or watching this podcast. Adrienne, do you have people that work with building owners of all size? I mean, is this something that if someone has a building and they're watching this podcast and they're being faced with needing to retrofit or some solutions for their building, they can reach out to you?
Absolutely. We our bread and butter for many years has been high-rise corporate design and headquarters buildings, et cetera. But we do recognize that we're going to see more and more adaptive reuse, and it is a typology that we have a little bit of experience in. And so one of our favorite things is being able to vision what could happen with an existing piece of architecture. We do it with a lot of our headquarters clients, where we go and we look at what existing buildings do they have within their cities. Our project in Milwaukee Northwestern Mutual is a great example, where we went in and looked at some of the existing infrastructure, and then we're able to design a complementary tower to that. We have projects in the East Coast where we've got a more dense urban environment and a beautiful mid-century modern building, and that needs an updated skin. And so we've looked at that. And so by all means, we love a design challenge. So anybody that has one, please reach out.
Awesome. And I do want to talk about a couple of your notable projects as well. So this is a perfect segue, and you're the lead designer on these projects. So the first one I want to talk about is the 325 Main Street in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And the big tenant is Google. It's a 400,000 square foot building. And for those of you guys that are trying to grasp, and the next project's even bigger than this, but for trying to grasp the size of a 400,000 square foot building, we're talking about over 9 acres under roof, using multiple floors, obviously. 362,000 square feet of it is Google. So can you tell us about some of the cool features that you designed in this building?
Yeah, we were really, really lucky to work with them as a primary tenant. And the property is owned by Boston Properties, who is just a fantastic client as well. They're very visionary in what they're looking to include in their new designs in their portfolios. But they also fully appreciate that a building has to add to the existing urban infrastructure. And so the project itself is located right on Kendall Square, right on the T-stop there. And it serves as a landmark for the city of Cambridge at that T-stop. And it's a really active area. If anybody has been there in the last couple of years, it's completely transformed with all of the construction that's been happening with lab buildings and MIT. And so Cambridge is a changing place. So we were really tasked with creating a landmark building that also provided a very workable floor plate for the tenant, because we understood who the tenant was going to be, but also was going to serve the public. So there has been a rooftop garden behind the existing building that was on the site for many years. And it's kind of a beloved garden by the building tenants and the surrounding neighborhood. And one of our tasks was to maintain that garden, to create a more generous public access so that people who didn't know that it was there could see it, find it, and utilize it, because open space is a premium in downtown Cambridge. And then to also provide a series of open spaces throughout the building for the tenant. So the building is tied into a couple of existing buildings within the Kendall Square development. And we demolished a building that just wasn't quite fitting the needs of the current workforce. And through our building, we were able to tie into some of the existing and create some kind of super floor plates. which allowed them a lot more flexibility with how they manage their teams, allowed people to move a little bit more fluidly, have better connection to the other spaces, and create a vibrant environment. So there are a couple of exterior terraces to give people that access to the outdoor space that we were talking about earlier that's so important. And on the ground floor, we've created an access that is lined with retail. So it provides a little bit of an indoor reprieve from the cold Cambridge winters and a vibrant retail experience for the tenants as they come into work every day.
So just so somebody has an idea, from the minute that you were hired to take this project on and start designing to it being built, how long did that process take?
Oh, that's a great question. I think we started the process in early 2017, if I'm not wrong. My dates are a little bit funny because I had a child in the middle of the process of this project. So it's a really special one for me because it's my first East Coast baby, and I had a baby in the process.
You did you name him Google? Was it?
It would have been a great idea.
You're right, absolutely.
Yeah, so the project is currently under construction right now, and we went through a very vigorous process with the city of Cambridge. You know, they have a very stringent entitlements process. They have a number of boards that one must meet with as you're going through the design process. So we were designing as we were working with the city. So it was a very close relationship between us as the designers and with Google to be able to meet their expectations in terms of what the building needed to offer them to meet their needs as the tenant. It's under construction right now, and actually the enclosure just started going on about 2 weeks ago, and I think that by the end of January, it'll be completely buttoned up.
That's amazing. So started in 17, and you think you'll finish it up in early 21?
Yes.
Wow. So let's talk about 2+U. So that's another really big, beautiful concept here in Seattle, Washington, 686,000 square feet. So tell us a little bit about that project.
Right. So this was really exciting for us because it's in a really, just like the Cambridge project, this one is in a really great site in downtown Seattle. So it's located directly adjacent to the Seattle Art Museum, right on the waterfront there. So it is one of the Seattle skyline buildings that you see as you're taking the ferry into the port. And when we worked with Skanska was our client and the developer and the construction team on this project. And when we were first introduced to the project in the interview process, what they said to us is they wanted to create a building that stitched together the various districts of the downtown. It was one of the last remaining sites to be infilled, and it's one of the smaller blocks on the historic Seattle grid. And it's at the interface of the arts district, the business district, and the waterfront district. And so it had a really great opportunity to be able to tie these different districts together, create a vibrant ground plane, and a very prominent landmark structure for the city of Seattle. So what we did was we actually took the tower and we picked it up above the ground plane. So the tower is raised 7 stories in the air. And then we created this vibrant urban village that was at the same scale as some of the existing structures and one of the historic buildings in Seattle called the Diller Hotel. So the urban village along the ground plane is a vibrant retail space for food and beverage. It also has a plaza, a gathering space at the heart of the development, which can be accessed directly from the Seattle Art Museum. So what we did was we created this really porous, very active ground plane for the people of Seattle. And by getting that tower up out of the way, we were actually able to maintain views out to the waterfront, which is something you don't really get on 2nd Avenue. As you're going by some of these big towers, you know, the podium takes up the whole block and you have to get into the middle of the avenues to be able to see down to the water. So with 2+U, we got it up out of the way to be able to maintain those views for everyday pedestrians in downtown Seattle. So it was an exciting project. We were lucky to work with Skanska, who's a really visionary developer, and had the guts to take on this design. So,
well, it sounds like they were really lucky to have you. So it's amazing. I think you do beautiful work. And Adrienne, thank you so much for just being with us this evening and all of your knowledge and helping our youth and just really enjoying what you do. So thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I'm looking forward to watching many more of your podcast.
Thank you so much. And guys, thanks for watching. And check Adrienne out. We've got all of her links below. And if you are in the need of an architect, you know where to find one of the best. See you next week. Sachs Realty, Maryland broker number 607720, office number 443-318-4514, equal housing opportunity.